In this video, I'm going to have a series of videos that I did on Counterplans where I go through the basic concepts, the structure, some samples, how to answer a counterplan, and some different things about permutations. Now, this video is different than a lot of the other content that I've been producing and that other people have been producing for this channel because this is actually a class that I taught and different parts of that class. I had one debater who couldn't make class and another debater who wanted to review all of this stuff. So I put it all together as a video for the two of them to watch, and I just happened to decide to publish it here as well. So this is a 5-part video that's all in one video that goes through an introduction to counterplans, but it's going to be a little different because you'll hear me interacting with people that you can't hear. I'll misspell things, so like opportunity is misspelled for like 10 of the first 15 minutes of the video, things like that. This is what you get when you are in one of my classes, so I just decided to publish this whole series in lieu of doing them individually or in some other format. So enjoy. The affirmative in the debate exists because a problem exists and they think that that problem needs to be resolved. So they say, we need to resolve a problem or some harm is going to take place. Normally, that harm takes place, or takes the form, rather, of a contention, right? They say, hey, universal child care is good because it leads to good educational outcomes, which helps the economy, or a federal jobs guarantee helps resolve COVID, and that's good, or any of the number of things that a contention tried to resolve, right? So, in an counterplan, what does a counterplan try to do structurally or substantively in the debate? What does it do? It does two things, and I think that this is a good way of thinking about it. The first thing that it does is it provides an opportunity cost to doing the affirmative in the debate, right? The affirmative presents one opportunity, the negative in the debate presents another opportunity. It also tries to solve or resolve the contention or harms or something about the affirmative. Normally, there is some structure or part or some strategic reason in each counterplan that functions to interact with the AF. Normally, when I teach this, I say it steals the AF. Normally, I would say it steals the AF. What that means is pretty much the counterplan exists to try to take this contention from the affirmative in the debate. They're like, okay, you read an economy contention, we're going to read a counterplan that does that same thing. So, on one level, they're going to try to solve for the same things that the affirmative is trying to solve for. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but most counterplans are going to try to solve for all or at least part of the affirmative in the case. The reason for that is a counterplan is a defensive argument. It's saying, hey, instead of us talking about the affirmative and their contentions in the debate, we agree with that. We're going to talk about something else, right? So what this does is it makes it harder for the affirmative in the debate to leverage their contentions against the negative because the negative has essentially stolen them or is also resolving or solving them themselves, right? So that's strategic and that matters because Before Counterplans, the affirmative was just going against the status quo in the debate. So that meant they got to weigh all of the affirmative's contentions in the debate versus the negative's disadvantages. Now they are unable to do that because the counterplan is going to solve the contentions and not make them have the ability to do that outweigh decision calculus type of thing in the debate that they would do in a disad versus AF or disad versus status quo, or rather AF versus status quo style of debate, because the negative is also trying to resolve those problems that the affirmative has presented in the status quo, or probably at least some of them. So it's definitely going to try to solve the affirmative, at least partially, because strategically, counterplans are a defensive argument that make it so that you don't have to argue against a portion of the case, right? So if the affirmative solves the economy and the negative solves the economy, unless your internal link or reason why you solve the economy is so much better than the other team, like, you're probably both going to win a pretty similar access point to the economy, that it's going to be hard to differentiate between the two. Now, there's good debaters, bad debaters, all sorts of things like that could, not be the case. But generally speaking, in a typical debate of even skill level, I would say that that's generally the case. The counterplan strategically is meant to neutralize the affirmative in the sense that it yoinks their contentions from them in the end round decision calculus at the end of the debate. Now, in order to get there, it has to be an opportunity cost. What do I mean by an opportunity cost? Anybody? What does an opportunity mean? If I have an opportunity, what does that mean to you?
A chance to do something?
Yeah, it's a chance to do something. So if there's a chance to do something, does it assume that that chance might come at the behest of other chances? Like, if I gave you a chance to try out for the men's varsity football team at your school, might that trade off with the opportunity to participate in another fall sport at your school? Probably, right? There's not many schools that I know of that will let an athlete participate in two sports in the same season at the same time. So you probably would have to choose that opportunity and chance over a different chance. So really what the counterplan is going to test is, does the option that the negative has presented in the debate, does that option that they have presented come at the opportunity of doing the affirmative in the debate? So if I was walking down the street and that was my affirmative, and your affirmative said, Scott, eat ice cream, I'm pretty confident that I can walk down the street and eat ice cream at the same time. Like, I'm pretty sure I could, hold the ice cream cone and march down the street eating it at the same time. Like, I'm 100% confident that I could do that. Now, if the affirmative was not walking, if it said run and eat ice cream, that's definitely a lot more of an opportunity. I'm going to be running, it's going to be hard to eat, etc. Now, if you said, Scott, ride a bicycle, and then you said, Scott, eat ice cream, I'm going to tell you right now, I am not skillful enough in order to ride a bike with one hand and eat ice cream. So there's zero chance that I'm going to be able to do that. So me eating ice cream and riding a bicycle probably comes at the opportunity of each other. Does that make sense to y'all? How the opportunity cost of an affirmative would work? It says, you can't really do these two things at the same time, or these two things don't interact in a way that make it so that they are compatible with one another, right? So can y'all think of any potential examples of things that would come at the opportunity of one another. One of the examples that I already gave was playing a sport. You probably can't play a sport and do another sport in the same season. It's probably really hard to do a sport and do competitive debate at the same time, right? Let's consider if you were a high school soccer player. Let's say your soccer games happened on Saturday afternoon. Would you not have to choose between going to a competitive debate tournament and going to a soccer game? Like, you definitely could not do these debate tournaments that we have been doing all year online and go to a soccer game at the same time. Like, you would definitively have to miss rounds in order to do that, unless it was like, I don't know, like Berkeley or something like that, where the schedule is like 6 hours in between a debate and you could like potentially get away with that. But, you know, that's an example of an opportunity cost where one thing likely comes at the behest of another thing. Does that make sense to everybody? Or is there any questions or anything like that in terms of sort of like counterplans as a whole? Like, we have yet to get to like the structure of a counterplan, but sort of like at a philosophical level, I think that, you know, there could be other people who disagree with this, but I think that these are the two biggest things that when you look at a counterplan that you're going to look through. Now, an opportunity cost, and the reason we do disads before we do counterplans, the reason we do disads before counterplans is that, oh, this pen does not work, is that normally the opportunity cost is going to be a disad. Or normally the opportunity cost is going to be a disadvantage that is avoided by the counterplan, also known as the net benefit to the counterplan. So, for the example that I gave of me eating ice cream, net benefit. Of the example that I gave of me eating ice cream, what would be an example of a net benefit to the eating ice cream alone rather than me trying to ride a bike and eat ice cream? What might the eating ice cream alone avoid that the ice cream bicycle riding Scott would probably link to in a debate? Any guesses?
Dropping the ice cream?
Yeah, right? Maybe the dropping the ice cream DA, you know, yeah, I might definitely link to the, like, you know, I'm gonna fumble my ice cream, throw it, maybe it gets on my shirt, something like that. I was thinking a little bit more mean. Can anybody else think of what I might have been thinking of?
You fall off the bike?
Yeah, I fall, I crash, right? Something like that. Like, I'm gonna tell you right now, my ability to pilot the bike with one hand like this and hold my ice cream, there's zero shot that I am not crashing into other people, into like parked cars. Like, there's zero chance that's not gonna happen, right? So that would be something that would happen if I would do both of those together. Would that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Now, let's think about it this way. Let's say I said exercise is bad for Scott. If I said exercise is bad for Scott. If my affirmative was Scott should ride a bike, and my negative was Scott should eat ice cream, regardless of whether or not they happen together, is me eating ice cream ever going to be exercise? Hopefully not, right? Hopefully not that me eating ice cream is going to be an exercise. But if I'm saying exercise is bad, the affirmative is always probably going to link to that disadvantage because the affirmative is going to be me riding a bike. And if I'm riding a bike, I'm going to be doing exercise. So that's a net benefit that would link to the affirmative regardless of whether or not the action of the counterplan happened or not. So that is a basic intro to sort of like the strategic use and how counterplans function before we get into the actual structure of how a counterplan works in a debate. Any questions from y'all at this point? All right, so the next part that I want to talk about is kind of like the structure of a counterplan. The structure of a counterplan. Structure. Did I spell it right? Structure? Yeah. The structure of a counterplan is pretty different when compared to a disadvantage in a debate, simply because there's pretty good community consensus as to what the parts of a disadvantage are. What do I mean by community consensus? What do I mean by community consensus?
What people generally like think makes up DA?
Yeah, what I mean it's not specific to a DA, but generally community consensus would be the members of a community, what they think exists in their community in terms of the agreed upon ideals, shared beliefs, things like that. So with disads, typically everybody teaches the same structure for a disadvantage. There's uniqueness, link, internal link, impact. Everybody who I've pretty much ever known in debate teaches disadvantages that same way. Counterplans, completely different because different people think that you need different things for a counterplan. So universally, I would say there's only one thing that you need for a counterplan, but I personally think that there's two things that you need for a counterplan. The first thing that you definitively need for any counterplan is a text. And a text is just going to be the statement that says what the counterplan does. So this is very similar to when the affirmative in the debate either reads their plan text or reads the resolution in a debate and says, hey, this is what we are going to defend in the debate. The text of the counterplan says, hey, this is the textual thing that we are going to defend as our alternative advocacy to the status quo as the negative in this debate. So the text is that statement that says what they are going to defend. I would say everybody thinks that that counterplan probably has to have some textual thing, unless the argument about the counterplan is about that being bad, but I'm not going to go there right now. So, text. Something that says what it does. Can anybody guess what the second part that I think is required, but I'm seeing some people not do this as much anymore? Any guesses? It's in most affirmatives. Nah?
No. I was gonna say impact, but no, right?
No, because they're trying to solve the impact of the affirmative. So it's not an impact, it's solvency. Right? Think about the LD topic that we had for November and December, right? The affirmative said a federal jobs guarantee. The most popular counterplan on the topic was the UBI counterplan. If the affirmative said federal jobs guarantee solves the economy, the negative's counterplan solvency piece of evidence said a UBI solves the economy. So a federal jobs guarantee solves the economy, UBI solves the economy. The purpose of solvency is to read that piece of evidence that normally either interacts with the affirmative, says that you solve the thing that they try to resolve, or that the action of the counterplan would work. Can y'all think of an instance in this past season where people normally read a solvency advocate about the action of the counterplan working? I'll give you a hint. It was on the laws topic.
Is it the partial ban?
The partial ban counterplan, 100% correct, right? They read a text that was like, states ought to regulate lethal autonomous weapons, and then their solvency advocate normally didn't say like that solves escalation or that solves whatever the affirmative's impact is. Normally it said a regulation is effective. So solvency for a counterplan can work twofold in that it can be solving the affirmative's internal links or impacts or whatever interaction it's trying to have to solve the affirmative. It can be that level of solvency, but it can also be the level of solvency that's like somebody advocating on behalf of the action of the counterplan taking place in the debate, right? So for a lot of instances, like let's think of like some super sci-fi thing. So like for instance, on the space topic, people used to read this affirmative about a space elevator, right? You'd probably have to read a piece of evidence that said like there was technology available for that space elevator to like elevate to the mesosphere, because as far as I know it'd probably be pretty hard to stack things up like 100 kilometers high in order to get to the point where the elevator could like jettison things off so that it would be worthwhile. So there's one level of solvency, but there's also the second level of solvency of kind of like how a normal AF would do it. That's kind of like, hey, we work, we function. The thing that we say is going to work in the debate. So I would say that these two are the two that you definitively need, and that normally you're going to see any counterplan that I give you or somebody that we have who would write a counterplan would normally have these two things. So I would say at a bare minimum, these are the two structural components to a counterplan that you need in a debate. Now, can you think of any instances upon which that these two structures were not the only structures? Are there any instances upon people we read secondary, or not secondary, like third level structures or fourth level structures that I have not written down here? No? So there's two. The first one is competition. The first one is competition. I used to do this like 15 years ago or 13 years ago or whenever it was when I was in high school. And this essentially is going to explain the counterplan a little bit and kind of like, I don't know, almost like give a brief little overview. So in when I did this, a lot of the reason that you read the competition part was to preempt permutations in the debate. So we'll get to permutations when we talk about answering counterplans, but really the competition part in a lot of instances was to preempt those arguments. So if I thought a permutation was going to be a successful argument or one that I was going to have to answer a bunch, I would put in a preempt here that's like, any permutation would have to do all of the affirmative, which means it would sever or it would link to the net benefit, and that meant that something, and then it's a voting issue for severance perms being bad. And that would be my little competition thing. It'd probably also include something that's like the counterplan solves the AF because blah 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 blah. And those were things that I commonly saw in like the competition structure standards or like components to a counterplan. But I would say that like I haven't done this since like my senior year in high school or my freshman year in college, which would have been like a dozen years ago, 13 years ago. So I would generally say that like this isn't really something that we do. And the reason that it's not something that we do is that this is normally something that the NR or in policy debate the block would say against an affirmative answer. So I think that, in my opinion, debate kind of evolved to be like, hey, we don't need to preemptively say these things. We can just say them if the affirmative chooses to respond to the counterplan in that way. The fourth part, the fourth structural component, you still see, but it just really depends on the counterplan, and it really depends on how strategic they are. I would say the most common instance in which you see this is with a pick. So with a pick, you see, and it's not actually a pick. I'm gonna put internal net benefit. Internal net benefit. And I would say that you commonly see this in picks. So an internal net benefit is going to be a reason why the counterplan is good on the counterplan flow itself. Normally when you read a counterplan in the debate, the reason the counterplan is going to be better than the affirmative is what? What's the reason the affirmative is going to be better than the counterplan? Or what's the reason the counterplan is going to be better than the affirmative? Not a clue? Any guesses? It's normally better because it avoids a link to a net benefit in the debate, right? So let's assume I have an affirmative. The affirmative says Scott should travel in a van to all 50 states. Scott should travel in a van to all 50 states. Does everybody get that affirmative? Yes, that's pretty simple.
Yeah.
All right, so if I have a pick, this is kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but a pick would do almost all the affirmative, but not all of it. So I had an affirmative that said, go to all 50 states. If the negative read a counterplan that said Scott should go to 49 states, Scott should not go to Hawaii, and then read an argument about why me shipping my van on a boat to Hawaii would be really expensive in order for me to go to Hawaii on my actual boat, in my actual van, rather. So that argument that would say going to Hawaii is expensive in Scott's van, the counterplan doesn't do that. A lot of times with picks, that is an internal net benefit. What makes it internal? What makes something internal? Just in life in general, what makes something internal? It's inside. It's inside of something else. So we call that an internal net benefit because it's on the flow of the counterplan in the debate. In a not internal net benefit style debate, your net benefit is going to be a disad that's going to be on a separate flow or a separate sheet of paper. In this instance, your net benefit is going to be something that is on the flow for the counterplan in the debate. Any questions here in terms of the structure of a counterplan and the different components? I don't know. I don't think that we have done this in any of the debates that we have specifically done for this class yet, but we have definitely done these two things. Actually, I think that I could be wrong. I think that we at least talked about, if not you didn't run, picks on the universal childcare topic. So do either of you remember on the universal childcare topic, it said childcare should be universal. And we said, no, it should be targeted toward specific people. That targeted counterplan is an example of a pick, likely, because the people who are targeted under the counterplan would also receive benefits underneath of the affirmative, but the counterplan does not give benefits to people who wouldn't qualify, like people who are rich or things like that. So, theoretically, we've gone over this, but we just didn't really give it like a distinctive name for what type of counterplan it was. So, the structure of a counterplan. Anything else? We're going to do a sample that talks about competition, how things work, etc. So, if I have a resolution and it says resolved Resolved. Scott's pen doesn't work. Resolved. Scott should eat fast food. Okay? And I have an affirmative in that debate. And my affirmative is Scott should eat at Raising Cane's. If you have not heard of Raising Cane's is a delicious chicken finger restaurant that has, or not restaurant, it's a fast food place, that has this like dipping sauce that's kind of like spicy honey mustard that I like a lot. And let's say that the advantage, contention, whatever you would like to call it, is Scott's hungry, and that fills Scott up. So that's the affirmative that we have on this potential topic of Scott should eat fast food. Now we're going to present a counterplan in the debate that says Scott should make a salad at home. Now, in and of itself, without anything presented here right now, does this counterplan provide an opportunity cost to doing the affirmative? Is there any reason why I couldn't potentially, do both of these things at the same time, or why one would come at the cost of doing the other?
I believe no.
No. Right? So, do you think that me eating a salad at home would more or less solve or resolve my hunger in the same way that eating at Raising Cane's would? No?
Right, sorry,
yeah. Yeah, probably. Right? There's probably a pretty good argument to be like, oh, it doesn't taste as good. I don't, it's not as savory. I don't love it as much. I'm not like, but it's as far as the like macronutrients that, my organic life form needs, I am likely from the salad to get the same amount, or probably better even, nutritional things, whatever, that resolves hunger, right? What would be a reason why me eating at Raising Cane's would probably not be good?
It's unhealthy.
Yeah, right? We could have a DA that says it's unhealthy, right? We could say uniqueness, like Scott's losing weight, or something like that. It's not true. The link would be everything at Raising Cane's is like 2,000 calories, and that destroys my healthiness that I have been on a tear with, that I'm imagining, because it's not actually true. Now, let's think about this. With this disadvantage of this unhealthy eating and Raising Cane's being 2,000 calories, is your counterplan now an opportunity cost of doing the affirmative in the debate? Probably. Yeah, it probably is. And the reason for that is that me eating a salad at home is probably never going to be 3,000 calories. I mean, it certainly could. I could, pour the whole bottle of dressing and put, a bunch of fried chicken in it, or, I don't know, you can make really unhealthy salads. That, it's a myth. But, hopefully if I'm eating a salad at home, it probably is not going to be 2,000 calories. So the counterplan is probably never going to cause this disadvantage to happen. Now, is the affirmative probably always going to cause this disadvantage to happen?
Yes.
Yes. I legit think that there is not a single healthy thing to eat on the Raising Cane's menu. Like, I actually think that, like, you can't get anything under 1,000 calories at Raising Cane's. Like, it's legit chicken fingers, French fries, that's it. So that affirmative is always going to link to this disadvantage in the debate, right?
Yeah.
So, what we are now going to talk about is how these things interact with each other from a competitive standpoint, and really what we're talking about here is what the affirmative is going to have the ability to do is there is an argument that they are going to be able to make called a permutation. And what a permutation is going to be able to do is a permutation is going to test whether or not the counterplan is an opportunity cost to doing the affirmative or not. So, the most common permutation that you're going to have is one that combines the affirmative and the negative counterplan together. So in this instance, a counterplan permutation would say Scott should eat at Raising Cane's and Scott should make a salad at home. Is the combination of those two things better than either the affirmative or the counterplan in the debate, or no? If we eat at Raising Cane's and I make a salad at home, do I still eat the 2,000 calories at Raising Cane's?
Yeah.
So, is the combination of the Raising Cane's and the salad better than just the counterplan in the debate? No. Yeah, no. Because it avoids this disadvantage, right? And if we really think about it, the combination of it, where I eat Raising Cane's and the salad, is probably worse because that's more overall calories that I'm consuming, right? So in this instance, with how this works, the combination of these two is not going to provide an opportunity cost to doing this. There are going to be other instances upon which that does work. And in instances where the affirmative can take a permutation to combine both the affirmative and the counterplan together and make it work, that permutation is going to beat the counterplan. So, legit, if a permutation proves that a counterplan is not competitive, the negative loses the counterplan. There is no other argument that the affirmative must win in the debate. If the affirmative wins a permutation, the counterplan is not competitive, and the counterplan goes away. The affirmative has beaten the counterplan. The number one way to prove that a counterplan is competitive is what?
Permutation?
It's that permutation what?
The link?
It links to the DA, right? So in the instance where we combined the AF and the counterplan together, we said that the perm linked to the DA, right? The perm in this instance was Scott should eat Raising Cane's and Scott should make a salad at home. We said that the combination of those two, since it still included Raising Cane's, it led to there being a lot of calories, which caused me to link to my unhealthy eating DA. So no matter if I did the affirmative or if I did both of them together, the affirmative still would link to this disadvantage that makes doing the counterplan alone by itself better. Because when I eat both of these things, that's a lot of calories. When I do this alone, it's not enough calories to trigger this disadvantage in the debate. Therefore, the counterplan would be more preferable to the permutation in the debate. In that instance, since it links and the counterplan does not, we have proven that the counterplan is competitive because there is a disadvantage that the counterplan does not link to, that the affirmative and the permutation or permutations links to. So, the biggest test against a or the biggest answer against a permutation is going to be that whatever the net benefit is, whatever the disadvantage, the reason to prefer the counterplan over the AF, that thing is no longer an option. Or rather, the negative is going to say that thing links. The affirmative is going to say it's not an option. It does not link. The permutation makes it so that there's no more link. We're going to get into that a little further. But again, the permutation is saying, hey, do these two things together link to this? Does this link to this? Because if these two things together don't link, we shouldn't have to worry about that in the debate because the counterplan's not competitive. Any questions? So, we just said that one way to answer a counterplan is to make permutations, and that permutations test the competition of a counterplan. That's a pretty fanciful way of saying they test whether or not it's actually an opportunity cost or not. So, earlier I talked about an affirmative where I bicycled and a negative where the counterplan had me eat ice cream, and how a permutation of doing both of those things would probably cause terrible things to happen because there's zero way that I can bicycle and eat ice cream at the same time. Like, I'm just not that skillful. So permutation was one of the ways. So permutation is a combination of the affirmative, normally all of the affirmative, and all are part of the counterplan. But before we get into there, the most basic way to think about how to answer a counterplan is an acronym, like most things in debate, and I in no way, shape, or form came up with this. This has been something that has existed in debate since, I assume, before I was in debate, and this, I literally, like, hear kids in my classes saying this, like, 3 years from when I teach it, just because it's a super easy way to mnemonically remember how you're supposed to answer counterplans. So, when you get your driver's license, there's this thing that's red and octagonal that you come to when you approach intersections that do not have a light. What is this thing called?
Stop sign.
A stop sign. Yeah, obviously. So, a stop sign is what you should think of whenever you are supposed to answer a counterplan in the debate. So you're like, oh shucks, new counterplan, I have no answers, no blocks, don't know what to do. Immediate thing you should think to yourself, stop, right? Not like stop in the sense of like it's not a big deal, right? You can easily answer this, but also stop in that this is an acronym that's going to inform you what you should do when you encounter a counterplan in a debate. So let's break this down. There are 4 easy ways to think of to answer a counterplan. The first way would be a solvency deficit. A solvency deficit. So a solvency deficit can come from 2 angles. The first way a solvency deficit can come from is that they don't solve the affirmative in the debate. So this is normally going to say there's some advantage or there's some contention that the affirmative has read in the debate that the counterplan does not solve. So if I read a federal jobs guarantee and I say it solves the economy for my affirmative, and the negative says a UBI counterplan and that solves the economy, an argument that says a UBI counterplan doesn't solve the economy would be a solvency deficit. It would also be a solvency deficit if you would say the counterplan itself does not work, right? So if I say a UBI won't be successful, or there will be problems executing a UBI administratively. That would be different than the affirmative is not solved by the counterplan, because we're talking about how the counterplan itself is functioning in the real world rather than it resolving hypothetical impacts in the debate world. So that would be a solvency deficit. The T in stop is going to stand for theory. Theory is going to say, hey, there is something that your counterplan has done that has made it very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, for me to answer the counterplan. And because you have done this theoretical thing, you should lose the debate. This is something that we're going to talk about way later. But you need to know that a theoretical objection is one of the 4 major ways that you can answer a counterplan in a debate. The third way is by reading offense. So, let's say I said UBI causes environmental destruction, and that leads to bad impacts. Like, I just made that up, so I have no idea. But if that were true, that would be a reason why the counterplan in and of itself is bad. You can, a lot of times, think about offense is like reading a disadvantage against the counterplan in the debate. So saying UBI bad would be offense versus the counterplan in the debate. That's the third way that you can answer a counterplan in a debate. The fourth way, we were just talking about at the beginning, which is a perm or a permutation. And a permutation tests the competition of the counterplan. Is it competitive with the affirmative in the debate? And we're going to talk about after this, sort of like, we're going to go more in depth in permutations because they're their own really separate thing that's a lot more in depth. I mean, not as in depth as like theory is, but you can make theory arguments about permutations. That's also on another level. But we're gonna spend a whole time in a bit talking about permutations themselves. So I just want to leave it at test competition for now. But these are the 4 basic ways that you can answer a counterplan. So somebody reads a new counterplan, you have absolutely no idea what to say in the debate. You can think STOP stop, make a solvency deficit, make a theory objection, make an offensive argument, make a permutation. Even if you don't have evidence to say these things in a debate, you might as well say something rather, because that gives you a shot at doing, at having a chance in the debate rather than doing nothing. The other thing to think about is just because these are 4 different ways to answer a counterplan does not mean that you can't make multiple ones of these same things. So, for instance, there's some counterplans where it's typical that you read 3 or 4 or 5 permutations in the 1AR or 2AC if it's policy debate in your 1AR. And the reason for that is that the negative has to spend a lot of time answering those arguments, and there are counterplans that they are just truly, really strategic against. So that is definitely one angle of this in terms of permutations. Any questions?
No, Scott.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to jump into the permutation component to this. So a perm is going to be a test of competition. We said that in, just a couple minutes ago. We said that a perm is going to be a test of competition. It's going to test if it is an opportunity cost to doing the affirmative with the counterplan. So you can think in the AC, the AF says do the AF, the NC says do the counterplan. In the 1AR, a permutation is going to say do some combo of the AF and the counterplan together, is what the permutation is going to say. Now, there are multiple types of permutations, and I'm going to break them down. The first one that I'm going to go through is what I am going to call a legitimate permutation. You could disagree with this. You could say what is and isn't legitimate, but generally speaking, I would refer to this as a legitimate permutation. And that would be a permutation that does all of the affirmative and part or all of the counterplan. Why do you think a legitimate permutation very specifically has to do all of the affirmative? Why do you think the affirmative in the debate should have to always do all of the affirmative? Do y'all remember earlier I talked about a counterplan where the affirmative was Scott should go visit all 50 states and the counterplan said Scott should go visit 49 states? Do you think it would be fair for me to answer that counterplan by saying, Perm, I agree, I should go to 49 states? What's the problem with that counterplan? Or not with that counterplan, that permutation. What is the problem with that permutation?
You're conceding the neg is correct?
What am I conceding is correct?
That the neg's counterplan is better than the AF.
You're not conceding it. What are you doing?
You're agreeing with it?
Are you still defending all of the affirmative?
No.
So, if you're not defending all of the affirmative, what does that mean you're doing in the debate?
Dropping part of your case?
Do you think that we should allow affirmatives to jettison parts of their affirmative during the debate?
No.
No, that probably wouldn't be fair, right? So imagine a debate where the affirmative said Scott should travel to all 50 states, and the negative said Scott traveling to Hawaii is expensive. Don't go to Hawaii. And the affirmative was like, we agree. Scott's not going to Hawaii anymore. We're only going to 49 states. What would be the problem with that? What's the problem with that style or format of debate? The negative can never get a link to anything, right? Because the affirmative is always going to change. They're going to say, oh, we don't do that thing. Oh, we don't go to that state anymore. Scott doesn't take his van to that state. If that's the case, can the negative ever get a link to any position that they have in the debate?
No.
No. Who has the last speech in the debate?
The AF.
So couldn't the AF just always clarify in the last speech and say, oh, we're not doing this thing. Oh, it's not competitive. We won the debate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the notion that in order for a permutation to be legitimate, whatever it upholds in the AC, it must also uphold in all of the permutations. Now, the number one way of doing this, of permuting, do you remember we talked about the structure of a counterplan, and the first part or structure of a counterplan was the text. It was the text. A permutation is going to combine the plan text, or the text of the resolution, if you're not reading a planned affirmative, and it's going to combine that with the counterplan text in the debate. So it's going to say combine these two textual things together. Does the combination of both of those things, or all of the affirmative and part of the text of the counterplan, is that better than the affirmative alone in the debate? Is that better than the counterplan in the debate? Does that disprove the fact that the counterplan is an opportunity cost? Because if the AF and the counterplan together are not an opportunity cost, then the counterplan should go away in the debate. The negative should not be able to win the counterplan if the affirmative and the counterplan combined together are not an opportunity cost. So, in line with this, there's the idea that the affirmative has to always defend everything that they say. If the affirmative doesn't defend everything that they say in every speech, what do we call that? If the affirmative gets rid of something that they were previously defending, what do we call that in a debate? Has anybody ever heard the term... Oh man, this is the bad pen. Has anybody ever heard the word sever in debate before? Or in real life? What does the word sever mean?
Sever means to like cut almost.
To like cut, to take off, right? So like, for instance, in the French Revolution, right? The French Revolution was famous for the guillotine. The guillotine. And the guillotine, right, it severed the heads of the people who opposed the revolutionaries from their body. It severed. So what the affirmative would do in debates where they sever the affirmative is they're going to not defend all of the affirmative in the debate. They say, the affirmative is this whole object. You don't do all of that whole object. Your permutation, in order to function properly in the debate, in order for your permutation to be legitimate, it must include all of the affirmative. If not, it severs. So these affirmative permutations that would do less than the affirmative, we call a severance permutation. So a severance permutation is going to do less than all of the AF. A severance permutation is going to do less than all of the AF. So if the AF said go to all 50 states, a permutation is going to defend me going to not all 50 states. That is a severance permutation. A legitimate permutation is going to do all of the affirmative. Now, if I had a permutation, or if I had an affirmative that said Scott should go to Germany, if I had an affirmative that said Scott should go to Germany, and the counterplan said Scott should go to Switzerland, Poland, and Finland, I could say permutation Scott should go to Germany and Finland. Permutation Scott should go to Poland and Germany. Permutation Scott should go to Finland, Poland, and Germany. Because all of those things include all of the affirmative and different parts of the counterplan. So you can take parts and parcels of the counterplan, but you cannot take parts and parcels of the affirmative in the debate. You must include all of the affirmative in your permutation to be a legitimate permutation. Lots of people will accuse permutations that aren't severance permutations of being severance permutations, so it's important to know this distinction so you can kind of correct or call those people out. But a lot of permutations are severance permutations, and a lot of people just think that, you know, if they make the argument that severance permutations are bad, which would be a theory argument, that, you know, if you would go for that permutation, you would lose the debate. But this normally isn't something that, if the affirmative presents a severance permutation, they're normally not going to win the debate on or they're not going to lose the debate on like you read a severance permutation. It's just in the instance that they do advocate for that, that is a argument that is really useful to have in your arsenal. So there's a couple other types of permutations. This is the main big one that we see in almost, I mean, I would say lots of debates are going to argue that any permutation is going to be severance, or it's going to link to the net benefit or disadvantage in the debate. The other one, the other component, or the other type of permutations, and again, these are probably going to be considered illegitimate permutations, would be an intrinsic permutation. An intrinsic permutation is going to add a component to the perm that is not in the AF or in the counterplan. So if I said affirmative, Scott should go to Germany, counterplan, Scott should go to Poland, if I read a permutation that said Scott should go to Germany, Poland, and Italy, that permutation would be intrinsic, because Italy is not in the affirmative, nor is it in the counterplan in the debate. So an intrinsic permutation is generally a type of illegitimate permutation that's going to include something that's going to be in neither the affirmative nor the counterplan. And normally people are going to say that that's not something that the affirmative should be allowed to advocate for or say as a permutation, because it just literally adds anything. Like it's literally endless. Like there's probably an infinite number of things that the affirmative could add if you allow them to do intrinsic permutations, because they could add literally anything. So a lot of people say that's unpredictable. There's too much ground for the affirmative. It's unlimiting. Lots of different things like that. The purpose of this is not to get into like the theoretical reasons why these things are necessarily good or bad, but to have a general understanding of what they mean. So that's permutations, legitimate permutations, illegitimate ones, a breakdown of different illegitimate ones. Any questions in terms of permutations and how they function as an affirmative argument in the debate?